always be closing.
Hey, it's Lee Bergstein, and we are still here from the Real Deal Forum, having podcasts all day. Super excited to have with us right now Erik Engquist. Erik is a seasoned journalist, editor with over 3 decades of experience. He is the senior managing editor at The Real Deal. We'll be moderating forums later today that are far more important than this one. So we thank Erik for taking some time to be here today. Thanks, Erik.
It's great to have you here at the forum.
Thank you very much. You're the first person that said that. So now I officially feel welcome to the forum.
Well, I'm actually part of the TRD staff. So.
That's a great event. And there's a lot today at the forum. I think you're going to be hosting a forum about politics. We wanted to talk to you about the upcoming mayoral race, the intersection between that race and housing policy and the broader real estate landscape. And I thought what might make sense is to kind of go through the candidates.
Okay.
That makes sense. So why don't we start with the incumbent, Mayor Adams? And I guess, why don't we take 2 minutes to just talk about where he's really spent time focusing with respect to housing policy over the last 4 years, and where you expect changes in that policy were he to be reelected,
Well,
if any.
I don't think he would change his policy if reelected. First of all, I don't think he has a very good chance to be reelected. I'm not going out on a limb by saying that.
Sure.
Because he's not running in the Democratic primary. And in this point, it's very difficult to win a general election in New York City if you're not on the Democratic ticket. So he's taking a risk by doing that. But he has been a very pro-housing mayor.
Yeah.
The only problem really with his housing policy is that he lost some of his political capital when he got in trouble. And so without political capital, he hasn't been able to push the housing policy as strongly as he otherwise would have. But his administration has continued to do that. So he's been very aggressive about rezoning. He got off to a little slow start, but he has several rezonings in the works. And he wants to add as much housing as possible. He's been very good about calling out NIMBYs, the not in my backyard crowd. And they have been a significant impediment to housing in New York City. There's no mystery that we have a tremendous housing shortage. And I have to give Mayor Adams credit that he's realized we cannot improve affordability unless we add supply.
Right.
We just cannot. There's not enough money to just build affordable housing for everyone. There's not nearly enough. You have to have the private sector building as many units as it can to absorb this tremendous demand to be in New York City.
And this is something every major city is dealing with right now. You don't see local politicians necessarily addressing it in the same way he has.
The problem in New York was that we went to this period where people were afraid of development. They were afraid of housing development because they thought it would gentrify neighborhoods and would cause rents to go up. Now, if you're in real estate, you know that adding supply causes rents to go down,
right,
not up. But there was this impression that if you built nicer buildings, then everyone would raise their rents. But in fact, of course, nicer buildings provide competition and other folks have to compete with you. And so if anything, they would modify their rents to try to but we still have tremendous low supply and high demand. So that's why the rent is very high in New York. And Mayor Adams has done a good job of sort of beating the drum for more housing. So, the only issue is that he ran into legal problems, and I don't see him being able to continue that legacy.
Has there been a shift at all in his approach since Trump was elected, or has it been a straight line on with respect to at least housing policy since he was elected?
Good question. There hasn't been a change, and that's to his credit, right? Because the economics of housing don't change.
There's a change in some other things.
Yes, there was a change in how he dealt with immigration,
right?
And Rikers Island, but on housing, like the laws of economics do not change regardless of who's in office,
right?
Right, and he knows that you cannot solve this problem unless you build housing. So, for instance, he's aggressively rezoning Midtown South. He wants to add a lot of housing there, and there are rezonings going on around the Metro North stations planned in the Bronx. And other places, Long Island City has a rezoning pending now, which is going to add thousands of units of housing. So he's been very pro-housing in that sense. I mean, if anything, we could have used even more rezonings. But I give him credit for the ones he has done. And City of Yes was also like a citywide rezoning.
Right.
Then that will add about 80,000 units over 15 years. So that's something.
And how instrumental was he in getting 485X, and has that been a net positive for the housing market so far?
So the mayor did go to Albany, and he asked Albany for upzoning.
Mm-hmm.
So Albany, New York City is a creature of the state. We really can't do anything here unless we have Albany's approval. So he had to go to Albany and ask for more authority to upzone, and he got it. So now, of course, the governor was already on board, so it wasn't like he had to lobby her especially hard.
Right.
She's of the same mindset in terms of adding supply. So I wouldn't say that was the heaviest lift, but previously other mayors had not done it, and he did. So he gets some credit for that. Increasing the FAR, the floor area ratio, allows you to build more housing. And so he can now upzone Midtown South because of that change in the state law.
So let's talk about, I guess, the presumptive favorite right now is the former governor, Andrew Cuomo. What is his position on some of these issues? If he's elected, do you expect a continuation of the policies that are in place? And if there are going to be changes, what do you expect those changes to be?
So I read Cuomo's housing plan. It's 29 pages. It covers a lot of
29 pages.
29 pages.
Is it a lot or a little?
That's a lot.
Okay.
It's not.
We're lawyers, so we're used to long, overly verbose documents.
Yeah. So it's 29 pages. It is not the longest of all the housing plans. Like Brad Landers is 36 pages, and I think Zelnor Myrie might even have a longer one. But he does cover a lot of bases. I will say it's not the most aggressive housing plan by any stretch. It might even be the least aggressive.
Okay.
Housing plan.
What do you mean by that?
For instance, he rules out upzoning in low density neighborhoods. Now, he understands that upzoning is not very popular in low density neighborhoods.
And for people who don't know what that means, what is upzoning? What does that mean?
So adding the capacity to build more housing as of right. In other words, without having to go through a political process. So once you upzone, then you can build more housing without jumping through political hoops and getting political
eliminating
approvals.
the red tape.
Eliminating the red tape. All you do is go to the Department of Buildings and file your permits.
That sounds nice.
If you have the zoning, right?
Yeah.
But getting that zoning is hard, and it's very politically difficult. And you get into a lot of fights with the residents of those neighborhoods. They don't want new housing there. And Cuomo, in his housing plan, says we don't need to upzone those neighborhoods. We're just going to keep them the way they are. He does propose adding housing in a lot of other places, like above libraries and above schools. And, he sort of recycles a lot of ideas that are already out there, things that have already been done. And those are good ideas. Like, I'm not saying that's bad.
Right.
It's just not innovative. It's not new. The one new thing that he did suggest is he said you should have a private person or company go through the city agency's property list and see what you can do to build housing there. Because what mayors have done in the past is they've asked agencies, what can we do with your property to build housing? And of course, agencies really don't want to do that. They want to keep their own property.
Right.
So Cuomo said, have the private sector go through them and make a realistic list.
So it's like a variation of Doge, but in the real estate sector to look at property that's, I guess, is it unutilized property, underutilized property, or property that's actually being used, and the intent is to convert the purpose.
Yeah. So this property that's being used.
Okay.
It's all property that's being used. There are city workers in these buildings, these office buildings mostly. Can they be converted? Yeah. Where do you move those workers? I don't know. Maybe you can lease space in office buildings. I mean,
Right.
There's plenty of office space for lease right now.
Yeah.
So you would have to spend more money to lease space that you already own, but you would be able to add housing if you did that.
What is he looking to depart from any of Mayor Adams' policies with respect to housing? And then I guess in the broader real estate sector, is there any significant departure in policy, or real estate's not the place to look if you want to look for policy differences between the two?
I would say that there's not a big departure. Cuomo is not really a risk taker.
Yeah.
Politically,
He doesn't need to be right now, right?
He doesn't need to be a risk taker, but that's his also DNA. Like he picks battles that he can win, that he knows he can win. So Cuomo will pick 2 or 3 things that he can win and will go after those things. I don't see him pushing the envelope on housing. He understands that we need to build more. He wants to build 500,000 units.
Right.
So there's that. But I don't see a big change in his policy from what we have now.
Okay. What about the candidate who you? I don't know. I actually don't know how popular he is as of today, but one who seems to be getting a lot of traction, at least on social media with younger people, is Zohran Mamdani. I'm trying to say his name correctly.
Yeah.
What are his views with respect to housing? I would imagine there we might see some significant departure from the present policy, but perhaps I'm wrong on that front.
No, you're right. Zohran Mamdani is the socialist candidate.
Yeah.
It's a little scary for real estate that he is polling second in the Democratic primary.
Where is he right now, percentage-wise, roughly?
I mean, he's pretty far behind Cuomo. It's like 20 points behind.
Yeah.
But
that could change quickly. It
could change. You never know. I mean, the 4 years ago, the race tightened up quite a bit, right? And early in the race, Andrew Yang was winning, and he ended up nowhere.
Who you're going to be speaking to later today.
And no one had heard of Catherine Garcia, and she almost won.
Right.
She lost by less than a point to Mayor Adams. So anything can happen between now and the June primary. So we don't know what's going to happen with Zohran Mamdani. What we do know is what his policy is. Like, he's very into social housing. He just wants to build affordable housing with taxpayer dollars. And he wants to spend $100 billion of taxpayer money to build social housing. Where is this money going to come from? He's going to borrow it. So, yeah, let's just issue bonds for $70 billion worth of bonds, and then add that to the $30 billion that we are already planning to spend.
Right.
And that's how, voila, you get a $100 billion plan. It's not a very realistic plan. He wants to build this all union, which is obviously more expensive.
Yeah.
And if you look at how many units he wants to build with that money, it comes out to $500,000 per unit. You cannot build union build housing for $500,000 a unit. It's actually close to $800,000.
Yeah.
So the math is simply wrong. And even if you had the money, which we don't have, unless you raise taxes significantly, so this plan doesn't work in any way you look at it. You can't build housing for $500,000 a unit with unions. And, you can't conjure up $70 billion out of thin air.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are some very compelling logical counterpoints to his policy positions. I guess the danger for the other candidates, particularly Cuomo, in combating it is the headlines can sound sexy to a certain sector of the population, mostly younger people who might not be that engaged right now with respect to polling. But as time goes on, they hear more affordable housing, more union work, cheaper housing. Those are sexy headlines for younger people. So how is that combated?
Yeah, I mean, look, the problem with elections is the average voter is not going to get deep into these issues.
Sure.
I mean, cost per unit is never going to come up.
Right.
In a mayoral debate, in a campaign ad, in anywhere but a real estate podcast like we're doing. So
that's why everybody stopped listening 2 minutes ago.
So, yeah, no, but so the people who listen to these, they're real estate junkies, they're economics they're people who understand the laws of business, right? And real estate. And so, because you can't make money in this business unless you understand that. But in politics, that's like way, way down on the agenda. It's all about bumper stickers and campaign ads and what you can sell that sounds good.
Yeah.
And, building $100 billion worth of affordable housing does sound very good. The problem is if you can't do it, if it's not a realistic plan, you really have no plan.
Right.
So, yes, he is appealing to certain people who think the private sector can only build super luxury housing and won't change affordability at all. But if you look at some of the other candidates, like Zohran Mamdani, for instance, he understands that you need the private sector, A, to build that scale, and B, that it can also subsidize affordable housing by building market rate.
Yeah.
And Zohran Mamdani doesn't believe in that. He just wants to build social housing. There's nothing wrong with building social housing, but if you put all your eggs in that basket, you will not get enough units to solve the housing shortage.
I don't want to give short shrift to the other candidates. You mentioned Zohran. Again, compare and contrast him to the other candidates.
So Zohran Mamdani, state senator from Brooklyn, he has the most aggressive housing plan, like full stop. He wants to build 700,000 units.
So is it most robust or most aggressive or both?
Same thing.
Yeah.
In my estimation, like I'm just talking about the number of units he wants to build and the way he would go about building them. So he wants to build housing really at every opportunity. And that includes rezoning some industrial areas that are in between sort of residential areas that are sort of stuck left over from previous generations when we were a manufacturing city, which we are not anymore. And he would rezone those areas to allow for residential construction development.
You could look at Williamsburg as like the prime example of how that worked really well, right?
Yeah, or exactly, it's worked very well there. We've added a lot of units. Long Island City, we've had tens of thousands of units, and there are still lots of spaces out there where there's sort of leftover manufacturing from yesteryear.
Where is like the prime example of that in like a place that people might know who are listening?
Like Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn is a good example. Like if you've ever driven down Atlantic Avenue, you look and there's like 1-story, 2-story buildings left and right. And they've got like car repair and, these little businesses, which are fine businesses, but they don't need to be right next to like the Atlantic Terminal train hub, which is the biggest train hub in Brooklyn, one of the largest in the city. And it doesn't make sense not to have lots of housing there.
And I want to also just briefly touch on Brad Lander. What does his plan look like?
So Brad has a pretty good housing plan. I'd say if you're in real estate, most people in real estate don't love Brad Lander because he's very, very progressive, but he also was an affordable housing builder. So he does understand the business.
Progressive, but not to the extent of...
He's not a socialist.
Yeah.
He's progressive, but he's not a socialist. And so he's not as extreme as Zohran Mamdani, for instance. He's a pretty smart guy. He does understand that you must build market rate housing if you also want enough affordable housing, because you can build mixed income.
Right.
Cross-subsidize where the market rate units subsidize the affordable units. And that's what he did in Gowanus. He did a big rezoning in Gowanus. And his housing plan is basically, let's do that everywhere. The only objection I had with Gowanus is it took him 8 years. Like it took him way too long because he was super careful about building support. And he just sort of said, full steam ahead, let's just do this in 2 years and get the housing going. And it took him so long that, a lot of those projects ended up in jeopardy because 421A expired and there was no replacement. And suddenly, there was a construction deadline and you ran into problems with the state law where all the rezoning would have come to naught, if you ran into that. But the state fixed that problem, luckily for Brad.
There's I don't know if you read there's a book that came out recently by Ezra Klein called Abundance, and it talks about how slow government operates and how slow projects proceed with. And I think this is a great example. If you don't push forward with good housing policy quickly, it's subject to so many variables, political headwinds, changes in the law, the economy,
changes in elected office too, like who's running, who's mayor. That can change pretty quickly sometimes.
Sure. Yeah.
And there are two components to that. There's the political red tape where he was being super careful because he didn't want to offend anybody. And then there's the government red tape where there's staffers in HPD or city planning and they just have too much work or they're moving too slowly and the projects are not moving through.
Yeah.
So, why does it take 2 to 3 years to get something just to the starting line of a rezoning process so you can build your project? Should not take 2 to 3 years. We need more staffers. To Brad Lander's credit, he wants to triple the HPD budget. We need more staffers. That would pay for itself.
Does that mean he would actually go faster if that's the case?
I happen to believe that these people, these are not staffers who are falling asleep at their desks. Like if you work for HPD, it's because you love housing and you want to do housing. So it's not like they're not working as fast as they can. There's just too much work for them.
Yeah.
And so things go slower than they should. We need more plan examiners. We need more city planners. We need more everything. We need more building inspectors.
Yeah.
We need more FDNY inspecters just to get all that red tape cleared up so we can get things moving faster.
You just want more buildings so you have more to write about, Erik.
We're the real deal. So like the more deals, the better.
Yeah. So before I let you go, and I know I didn't touch on every candidate, it's impossible to in the short time that we have. What's your expectation for the next 4 years in New York City housing, irrespective of the candidate? What's going to be like the big trend or headline for us to look forward to after the next election?
Well, I think there has been a fundamental shift in the way the elected officials and also the public views housing. we have gotten past that point where new housing is seen as a negative. We're past that point where everyone thinks housing is going to cause rents to go up. There are still some people who think that.
It's an 80-20 issue now for the most part.
Yeah. So I think we have achieved a fundamental shift where most people understand that we need more housing. And that's why every single candidate for mayor has a goal, a target of new units that we must build. And they're not saying, with the exception of Zohran, that we should only build affordable, saying we need market rate and affordable, everything in between, all housing for all types.
Yeah.
So that's a fundamental shift. I expect that will continue regardless of who is elected. Even if Zohran Mamdani wins, as socialist as he is, I think he would have to come to the realization that, we have to let the market work to an extent. He can try to get as much money for, affordable housing as he wants, but I don't think he would stand in the way of more private projects.
Yeah.
Because you cannot solve the problem without private projects.
Yep. Balance. You need balance in anything, and particularly in real estate.
Yeah. You can't be an extremist when it comes to, again, economics. It's sort of like science. The great thing about science is, it's true whether you believe it or not.
Right.
So you can't just think one thing about economics and make that happen because you're the mayor. The market is still the market. The rents are still going to be what they are.
Yeah.
There are a number of candidates who do want to freeze rents for rent stabilized units, but of course that's only, half of the rental units. What about the other half?
Right.
Those rents would still go up if you don't add supply.
Well, Erik, this was great. I know you have a lot to do for the rest of the day, so I want to let you get going and head to your next panel, but we really appreciate the time.
Thanks you very much. Great. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Always. Thanks, Erik.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polino on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.